Welcome to the Student Ministry Matters podcast. We want to encourage, equip, and connect those with a passion to impact the next generation for Jesus Christ. Student ministry can be a lonely place. You might even feel like you're the only one in your church or community that cares about students. Well, know this, you're not alone. People all across the country are engaging Gen Z and care deeply about the spiritual direction of these young men and women. Whether you're full-time, part-time, bivocational, or volunteer, if you have a heart for students, this is the place for you.
Welcome to the podcast. My name is Dan Carson, and I'm the Director of Student Ministry Matters. I'm thrilled that you've downloaded and are joining us in the conversation about student ministry. If you like what you're hearing, be sure to like, review, and share a podcast with others, especially those working with students. Now, on today's podcast, I'm sharing the first of two episodes that are recorded with Samuel Bierig. He's the author and editor of Fulfill Your Student Ministry. Sam is married to Mallory, and together they have one daughter, Abby Mae, and two sons, Levi and Owen. Sam serves as the dean of Spurgeon College at MidWestern Baptist Theological Seminary in Kansas City, Missouri. He served as a student pastor in Arkansas for 6 years and now serves as an elder at Liberty Baptist Church in Liberty, Missouri. He holds a bachelor's degree in theology from Ouachita Baptist University and received his master's of divinity from Southern Seminary. Let's listen together. Well, thanks for joining me for the podcast, Sam. I appreciate you taking some time to share about yourself and about your new book, Fulfill Your Student Ministry.
Yeah, thanks. Happy to be here. Glad to be on.
Well, Sam, we got connected in 2018 when I had a speaker suddenly drop out for our Student Ministry Workers Retreat. My pastor jokingly said, "Why don't you call Jared Wilson at MidWestern and see if he might be able to come?" And I thought, well, why not? So I reached out to Jared, and Jared is a part of the team there at the seminary. He quickly realized that he wasn't able to come down for our event, but he put us in touch with you. And again, that was a very short notice, and you were tied up. But again, you guys were so helpful. You introduced me to David Bronson, and I believe that David was on staff at your church, or as well as working through a seminary training. He was exactly what we needed. I just want to tell you that. I wanted to publicly thank you for your desire to help us and find a solution for that first year. It was a pivotal moment for what we were trying to do. And, after speaking to you and receiving your help, I knew that I wanted you to have you come and share with our group. So again, just thank you so much.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, I appreciate you reaching out, and it was providential, of course, for Jared just to connect us, and then David ended up coming, and I came out this last year, and it was a blast. Zamir came with us. So yeah, I mean, in line with that, even Jared's way that he went about it is it is our tagline here, but it really forces the issue. But we really do think, how can we help the local church, and what we exist for no other reason than to try to supply and aid them in some way. So whether that's finding a speaker or providing a class or whatever. So anyway, I'm thankful to see that work out, with you guys. So
well, it was just fantastic, and I love. It's one of the reasons I've made application there at MidWestern myself, just that idea for the church. It's powerful. Just some simple words, but very powerful. Well, for those of our listeners that weren't able to be with us at the 2019 Student Ministry Workers Retreat, I would love for you to share a little bit about yourself. And let's start with your call to Christ and your call to ministry. What does that look like, Sam?
Yeah, so I grew up in a Christian home, particularly of the charismatic flavor. And so that was the family that I grew up in, and very thankful, for my parents who were consistently taking my brother and I at the time, and then later on, half sisters and these sorts of things. My parents are divorced. They kept us in church, and I remember the scriptures being a part of my life and those sorts of things. I think I came to know the Lord savingly when I was 12, 13, and baptism followed that. Did not have a great understanding at all of what the local church was doing, or what you would just call basic, probably discipleship. So I understood repentance. I understood the gospel. in my own, psychoanalysis on the back end, I don't think that I necessarily thought very healthily about those things, but I can see God's hand, obviously, in the middle of that. Very idolatrous, very, very idolatrous about sports in high school. And that was a functional God for me. And I was successful enough at it that it worked that way, if that makes sense, in the world. And so 18 years old, senior year of high school, I walked into a Baptist church, and by God's grace, it was just very strange, but just really was taken hold of by this particular student pastor. He took me under his wing, and if you're coming from like a charismatic flavor of upbringing, you look at Baptists as kind of like the Army Reserves, and you're the Marines a little bit. And so I was quickly, disabused of that, and just so thankful for the scriptures becoming just unfolded to me in a new way. So, call to ministry was as out of left field as you could possibly imagine. So I had no consciousness of that as a category that I would potentially pursue. Very caught up, as I said, in just sports idolatry and kind of my own world of small fame, if you will. And so I was just taken hold of by the scriptures. I asked my student pastor, I was like, hey, man, I would love to just share I don't even think I recognized what I was asking, but I would love to share with the group, like what God's doing in my life. And he was like, yeah, I want you to share. And so I remember getting in the car. It was my 1987 Blazer S10, the slowest vehicle on the entire highway anywhere in Texas. And just like screaming at the top of my lungs after that experience of like, is this it? Like, is this what you want me to do with my life? Because it was the first thing that I felt that I had ever done that wasn't me centric, and just knew, man, this is eternal. This is something that matters. And I would cringe to imagine or hear what I actually said in that, but the Lord, just used that. And so, yeah, in one way or another, by God's grace, I've never really looked back from that. It doesn't mean that I haven't done other things or wasn't doing, it was years, honestly, before I was ever in some sort of vocational, like paid position. But it was just, I knew that that's what life for me, I wanted it to be about. And if the Lord would open up doors, that seemed to be the case. And so school and other things proceeded from there. But that was, call to ministry.
Yeah. Wow. That's awesome. What type of roles have you served in churches over the years?
Yeah. So like I hinted at there, and it's, good for this podcast, I had very little conception of a local church or what ministry would look like outside of like a senior pastor, kind of, music minister or youth minister. And so that was the category that I knew of. And, obviously knew about missionaries, that sort of thing. But, I was like, well, student ministry is what I'm going to do, and that's what I want to do. And it had such a massive impact on my own life. And, so that was the first thing that I started doing. I did some camps and that sort of thing, camp counselor, but as much as possible trying to preach or disciple people that were in the realms of student ministry. And when I was 21, I was at Bible college in Arkansas at Ouachita Baptist, and I took a position at a church. And so was there and did that in Hot Springs, Arkansas for about 6 years. And then from there, went to D.C., spent a brief time there at Capitol Hill in D.C., and then went on to Louisville and spent about a year and a half there trying to do school. And then the Lord brought me and Mallory, we didn't have any children at the time, but brought us out to Kansas City, and have served as an elder for about 3 years, and just cycled off there. But so that's kind of local church. That's what's gone on there. And then that was 2014 when we moved to Kansas City, and the idea behind that was the Lord seemed to be working in Kansas City at MidWestern as one of the six Southern Baptist seminaries, and we were interested in coming out here and helping. So we served as student life, essentially. So conferences, those sorts of things, and on campus whatever the mechanism of outside the classroom discipleship looked like, getting them involved in local churches. We were really involved in that. And then I took the dean's position about 2 years ago. In February, it was 2 years. So, yeah. So those are the ministry positions that the Lord has held me in.
So as dean, what does that look like? What type of role is that for the college?
Yeah. It's a blast. So just get to have my hands in a lot of different programs, as well as designing and putting forward classes and that sort of thing. So I do teach. I normally try to just carry one class a semester. So I teach hermeneutics, or just Bible interpretation, and then biblical theology, the macro, scope of the scriptures. And those are basically the two classes I teach. But outside of that, we have a fusion, a program called Fusion, which is connected with the International Mission Board, where last year, for instance, we deployed 61 students to go to, as best as possible, kind of unreached, unengaged people groups. And we highly train them to get them, going in that direction. And so that's Fusion. We have another group called Accelerate, where it's a 5-year undergrad to MDiv track, where we compress that degree together. And so my hands are just involved in that. We call those cohorts, if you will. And it's a way to keep them, connected and glued in to each other. And so I really oversee a lot of those things and recruiting and those sorts of things. So it's a manifold position, but and a little bit crazy, but I really like it. Higher ed is an interesting moment of inflection at this point. And so it's just, it's calling for a lot of thoughtfulness on how you manage online or those sorts of things. And so everyone is addressing those issues, and it's fun to be on the front lines, and challenging, but it's really, really fun. So,
well, I recently had an opportunity to be on campus at MidWestern for a 9 Marks conference. It was just a thrill to be there, to see the facility. It was really impressive. And so I love, I just love that place. Well, that's your ministry life, your vocational life, those type of things. I know you're married. You've got 3 kids.
Yes,
One of those is really tiny. But at 6 months old, I believe.
Yeah, he's 5-6 months. Yeah. So,
yeah. Well, let's ask a question to let our listeners know you a little bit better. What does a great date night look like for you and your spouse?
Yeah. So we like to go out to eat if we get a chance to do a date night, and Mallory and I are both incessant talkers, and so our best date night is not going to be to go to a movie or necessarily even to like go bowling or something like that, though she would dominate me more than likely. I've actually never beat her at mini golf, just for the record. And that's not for lack of trying. She's, and I mean, for an athlete, you're like, should not be this way. But she actually beats me legitimately every time. So yeah, for us, it would just be to go, to get a meal, and maybe a just slightly nice meal, and just talk and debrief and think through things. And we both, we have little kids and just church responsibilities, school responsibilities. I'm in on the backside of my PhD. There's just a lot of things that call for our time. And so being able to just work through stuff unhurriedly is our best date night. And so we really enjoy people kind of being removed from the situation and us just being able to connect soul to soul. So, yeah.
Well, one really important question for our listeners: MidWestern, as well as Spurgeon College, right there in Kansas City, which is known for the barbecue. So what's the best place in town for barbecue?
Yeah, so let me give you a brief background even on where I come at this question. So I grew up in Texas and spent a fair amount of time in Arkansas, and they all my wife is from Alabama. All 3 of those states claim greatness when it comes to barbecue. And I made it to, I guess, 28, 29 years old, and I could care less about barbecue, frankly. Like when we were moving to Kansas City, that was something that multiple people were like, "Oh man, you're going to love the barbecue scene." I was like, actually, that's kind of lost on me. Like, I don't really care that much about barbecue. So that changed. Dan, like it changed when I came to to Kansas City. So I went to, my answer is Joe's. Okay. So Joe's, KC Joe's is what it used to be called, Oklahoma Joe's. But I think with my father-in-law, and we went to Joe's, which is just on the Kansas side, but it's maybe 15 minutes from our house. And went over there, got some ribs, wasn't thinking anything about it, just like, okay, whatever. And I put this in my mouth and it changed me. Okay. It changed. I was like, this right here is incredible. And so I've never looked back. I mean, all Q39 is really good. I mean, all of them are good. If you're a tourist to Kansas City, then you go to Jack Stacks, and that's fine too. Gates is really good. And Arthur Bryant's is really good. Those would probably be like my second. Probably Gates or Arthur Bryant would be my second. But yeah, the top one would be KC Joe's. So
okay, fantastic. As you started listening more and more, I was like, there really is a barbecue scene up there.
Oh yeah,
and that's
it's serious.
Kind of anxious
it's serious
to hit
business.
some of those places. So
yeah.
Well, let's hop right into our discussion on your book, Fulfill Your Student Ministry. First of all, I love this little book. It was straightforward and concise. The subtitle hit the nail on the head as a manifesto and field guide for student ministry. Yeah. It addresses some of the shortcomings of many student ministries over the years, but never belittled those that have fallen into some of those traps. And I really appreciated that.
Yeah.
Sam, what prompted you to put together this book and choose the format that you did with the multiple authors and even the size of it?
Yeah. So, man, that's a great question. And I'll try to keep it really concise. I knew that I wanted to do something that was multiple contributors, just to draw together my friends that I knew from ministry and that were involved in student ministry. I wanted to give them a voice to speak in, and I knew they had something to say. And then secondarily, I was like, I can actually do this quicker probably if they help me than if I just write it myself. And I mean, yeah, there's nothing wrong with a monologue book or something like that of, kind of one voice. But I just felt like, man, if all these guys get involved in this, then it'll be probably stronger. And so that was sort of the pitch, and that turned out. As far as the format, I felt like, man, we need to have a quick, concise way, i.e. the manifesto, that we can say, this is what we mean and this is what we don't mean. So more of a sense of, this is what we're trying to draw people to, whatever church you're at. This is what we're trying to lift, and this is what we're saying, to varying degrees. We would like you to not do this anymore, either completely, or something like, a topical sermon on Wednesday nights in a youth group. Like, we're actually totally fine with that. That's like a great thing. It might be best to pursue still what would be called expository preaching, and make sure that that's your more consistent diet. But so we're just saying, hey, make sure that this is highlighted here, and this is maybe a secondary thing. Whereas what I've seen a lot of is just, the month of February is, on friendship or something like that. And then the month of March is
relationships,
on, parents, or
love.
The month of April is on social media. And it's just like, that's fine, but maybe let's just take the scriptures as they come out. And so that's what we're doing with the manifesto piece. I wanted to have in the middle section of each chapter, you're going to have a biblical defense of why we think that that's what's emphasized. And then the last piece is like next steps. So if you find yourself actually maybe not doing, or in a little bit less than optimal situation in whatever chapter that's talking about, whatever subject that is, then we're trying to provide you with next steps on, you could start changing this by this way, in this way. And so that was where that came from. I did want it to be practical. I wanted it to be rooted biblically and defensible, but then also concise in that manifesto statement that would hopefully move people along to go, is my student ministry healthy in such a way that comports with the scriptures? Like, if we're, insofar as the scriptures are a thing, or student ministry, of course, scriptures is a thing. Insofar as student ministry is a thing, it ought to comply with the scriptures. And these are just some ways, 21st century America, that we think this can map on in the way that a local church is working. So yeah, that was the idea behind it. So.
Good. I liked the format and what it provided and what it did. Well, Sam, in your book, you start with a statement. You talk about student ministry is in a bad way. Could you expand on that for our listeners?
Yeah. So in one sense, that's depending on who you are and your position in the student ministry world, right? You may disagree with that right out and just go,
Right.
well, what do you mean? And I, all I know to do is just to assess student ministry the way that I see it and the way that we see it. And I'm thinking, uniquely United States context,
Right.
according to the scriptures, And so, I mean, obviously I'm looking closer at a Baptist scenario. And so I'm not necessarily as privy to, what it looks like to be a student pastor in the PCA or something like that. I think I'm, as much as I can, as broadly as I can, I'm assessing that. And I do think that overall that is consistent, that, man, we are not probably focused on the right things in student ministry, and we're looking at the wrong metrics to discern whether we are doing well in this situation. And so I'm going to stay rooted every one of these chapters, and I'm going to push the guys, and what I think we produced here is to stay rooted in the scriptures and go, what is the value and mind of God on these issues? And then you apply them over to student ministry. And so for instance, I've just seen, just to take the local church, there's a chapter, Dr. Jared Bumpers, wrote that chapter. And what we're arguing there is the student ministry is subservient. That may not be a great term, but that's one coming to mind, subservient to the local church. And so it is about Miss Bonnie, who's 83, and also that 16-year-old. It's not about us just isolating that 16-year-old and giving him or her everything that they can hope, dream, or imagine in that student ministry. But then the moment that they, go off to college, or they move into, the local church as a whole, that they're lost. I think that that's pretty consistent, and we haven't been thoughtful, by and large, in a lot of churches on how to manage that these students, and when they become a member of a local church, they are a part of that local church. And so they're a covenant member, they're baptized in, and we want to be careful about that. But that is God's priority. He doesn't put, you could put a student ministry, for instance, alongside Sunday school or small groups or something like this. Even it's on a smaller scale, but like VBS, there's no passage in scripture that's going to tell us this is how this is supposed to work. What we know is we want to let the word of Christ dwell in us richly. So if these things that kind of coalesce with the local church as a whole, and the Sunday morning Lord's Day gathering, if they coalesce, then that's good. We want more and more scripture. We don't need less Bible. And so it's fine if it comports with that and coalesces. If it doesn't, then there's something wrong, and we want to bring it back into line with that. And that's where that statement's coming from. I think we're in a bad way is because we've gotten the cart in front of the horse, and we've let student ministry or children's ministry, or a lot of other things, get in the way of the overall building up of the church, as Paul says in 1 Corinthians. It's got to be about the whole church, and student ministry is going to fit inside of that, or there's something wrong. So, yeah.
Well, I totally agree. I think that one of the things, and you used a word that I kind of latched onto there, is that we haven't been thoughtful.
Yeah.
In this whole process. We get involved in student ministry when we are perhaps younger. We're in Bible college, we're in seminary, and we're working with students. It's fun, it's exciting. And then we go to that next thing, and we're doing that next thing, and then we don't stop and really think through what this is in relationship to the whole church.
Yeah.
We build up these huge ministries. We've got our great worship time on Wednesday night or Sunday night, whenever your students are meeting, and it doesn't have anything at all to do with the local church. I think that's a real important thing to think about. And so I think that I agreed with the statement, student ministry is in a bad way. Yeah. But I just wanted to expand that for our listeners, because I think that's important for us to see, is that if we're not thoughtful, we're not going to accomplish God's work and God's will within our group. So.
Yeah, and I mean, just to add on to that, I mean, even as I'm continuing to gain clarity and as you're responding as well, I think we really do have to think far beyond, at least on two levels. As a student pastor, you have to think far beyond those years, right? And so in one sense,
Yes.
most of us are being judged by a local church for how we're doing and managing that student in those years that they're confined to our area, if you will.
Right.
But all of what I think the scriptures would say is you're judged based on almost what's happening after that. How are they joined to that local church? How consistent are they? Are they thriving, growing members of that church when they're 27, when they're 47? That's where the fruit will show up in that first horizon of how you actually did with them, when they were 16 or 17. And then far beyond that, is student ministry in a bad way? I mean, these are eternal things, Dan. I mean, you and I have talked about this. This is not a game, this is, I mean, when I'm imagining I'm preaching to someone, whether that's, on a Wednesday night with students or, at a Disciple Now or something like that, these are eternal souls who will live forever. And I have to get the gospel to them. I mean, whether they are getting waylaid on, pornography or whatever's going on in their life or their own relationship, or whether that's some, pursuit of drugs or what have you. These are eternal people that I have one remedy, and it's not me. And it sure isn't, kind of games or whatever. It's Jesus Christ and bringing them to him. And that is the only thing that we have. That's great because it's the most powerful thing, in this universe, obviously. But if we don't, fit that. And like you said, if we're not thoughtful about that, about how can we segue these people into being faithful, healthy local church members, and then also prepare them for Judgment Day insofar as we're responsible, then we haven't thought through this. And so anyway, I just wanted to jump in there and maybe add that.
Oh, yeah.
Thanks for listening to the Student Ministry Matters podcast. Get connected at studentministrymatters.com or follow us on Facebook and Instagram at Student Ministry Matters. Until next time, keep up the great work with your students because the work matters.